Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere different. A time not of castles and candlelight, but of mud, mosquitoes, and the low thrum of helicopters in the distance. We're stepping into the life of someone who lived through one of the most brutal roles in modern warfare. Not a general with a map, not a soldier with a rifle, but the person who had to run straight into the chaos when everyone else was trying to get out. This is what it was like to be a combat medic in the Vietnam War. Forget the action movies, the slow-motion hero shots, or the romanticised version of bravery you might have seen in documentaries. The truth is rawer than that. Imagine being dropped into a humid, sweltering jungle where your uniform never dries, where every breath feels like drinking warm soup, and where every sound could mean another wounded man screaming your name. That was the reality. You weren't there to fight. You were there to keep others alive long enough to make it home, and the odds were never in your favour. So before we start, go ahead and dim the lights, maybe get comfortable, maybe put on a fan for that background hum. Let your room fade away as we step into a different world. Picture yourself not as a soldier, but as the person who had to carry scissors, bandages, and morphine into a place where bullets and shrapnel didn't care who you were. You wake up to heat, you fall asleep to fear, and in between you try to stitch people together with hands that never stop shaking. That's where we're going tonight. Congratulations, you've just opened your eyes in the middle of the Vietnam jungle. The good news is you're alive. The bad news is the jungle is also alive, louder than you ever thought possible, and it doesn't care whether you made it through the night. You're lying on a damp patch of earth under a thin poncho that barely counts as shelter. Your body feels like it was dropped into a steaming pot, every inch soaked in sweat that never actually dries. Your uniform, stiff from yesterday's sweat and mud, clings to you like wet paper. Somewhere nearby, something crawls through the undergrowth, and you don't even bother wondering if it's a rat, a snake, or just another swarm of insects. Because here, the answer doesn't matter. The jungle always wins. Your bed is a patch of dirt, softened only by leaves that have already begun to rot. There's no mattress, no pillow, just your helmet turned upside down under your head, and that helmet smells like rust, mildew, and the faint copper of dried blood that you'll never admit came from someone you tried to save 2 days ago. You blink, and your eyes sting, because even though it's morning, the air is thick with smoke from last night's cooking fire and the sweet rot of vegetation that never stops decomposing. There's no morning silence here, only the endless chorus of cicadas buzzing so loudly that it feels like your skull is vibrating, punctuated by the occasional snap of a branch that makes your heart skip in case it's not the wind. You shift your weight and immediately regret it. The ground is uneven, knotted with roots that dig into your back like broken bones. Your spine aches as if you've aged 30 years overnight, and your shoulders are permanently bruised from carrying the medical bag that weighs as much as a child. You stretch your legs, and your boots squelch, not because of puddles, but because the sweat inside them has soaked through your socks. They haven't been dry for weeks. Your feet are white, swollen, and soft, always on the edge of infection. You can feel the skin peeling when you flex your toes, and you know if you take those boots off, you might not be able to get them back on. So you leave them. You always leave them. You sit up slowly because sitting up too quickly means you'll make noise, and noise means attention. And attention in this place can kill you. The first thing you notice is the heat. It's not just hot, It's smothering. Even before the sun fully rises, the air feels like someone wrapped you in a wet blanket and pressed it against your mouth. Your shirt clings to you, soaked through with sweat before you've even taken a step. The humidity makes it hard to breathe, like you're trying to pull oxygen out of boiling soup. And the worst part is, you know this is the best the day will feel. By midday, it will be hotter, thicker, heavier. A constant punishment that no amount of water can fix. Speaking of water, your canteen is nearly empty. You shake it and hear the hollow slosh. Not enough for what the day will demand. You could refill it in the nearby stream, but you've seen what's floating in that water. Dead leaves, wriggling larvae, and worse, things you can't identify but know will kill you faster than a bullet. So you'll wait until the purification tablets do their job, even though they make the water taste like chlorine and rust. You force yourself to take the smallest sip, the metallic tang clinging to your tongue. It doesn't quench your thirst. Nothing ever does here. The smell is the next thing that hits you. It's a mixture of smoke, wet earth, and human sweat layered on top of each other until they have become one single inescapable scent. The jungle itself has its own smell, a sweet, rotting perfume of plants and decay, mixed with the faint, acrid stench of gunpowder that never seems to wash away no matter how far you think you've marched from yesterday's firefight. Every breath is a reminder that you're in a place that's both alive and dying at the same time. Around you, the rest of the platoon begins to stir. No alarm clocks, no bells, just the low groans of men dragging themselves upright, coughing into the thick air, spitting into the dirt, and cursing quietly about the leeches that found their way into their boots overnight. There's no privacy here, no quiet corner to yourself. Everyone sleeps together, breathes together, suffers together. You glance at the faces around you and see the same thing reflected in each one. Exhaustion layered over fear, a permanent shadow under the eyes. They're young, many barely out of high school, but their faces look older than their years, lined with worry that only comes from waking up every day wondering if you'll make it to nightfall. Your medical bag waits beside you. It's the first thing you check every morning, because unlike everyone else, your weapon isn't your rifle. It's that green canvas bag stuffed with bandages, morphine syringes, scalpels, and gauze. You unzip it with care, inspecting the contents like a priest tending to relics. You count the morphine, too few. You check the bandages, already stained from yesterday's work. You check the scissors. The blades rust at the hinges, because the air never lets metal stay clean. Every item feels like a lifeline, and every item also feels inadequate. You never have enough. There's no scenario where you do. You patch holes in men with nothing but tape and willpower, praying it holds long enough for a helicopter to arrive. A mosquito lands on your arm, fat and slow, and you slap it away, leaving behind a smear of blood that might not even be yours. Your arms are already dotted with bites, swollen and red, some scabbing over, others oozing slightly. You can't keep track anymore. Malaria pills are handed out, but you've seen guys take them faithfully and still end up shivering with fever so violent you thought their bones would snap. So you swallow yours anyway, washing it down with another sip of the metallic water, more out of habit than belief. The jungle itself doesn't wake up. It was never asleep. The noises are constant. The shrill cry of birds you've never seen, the constant buzz of insects that sound like tiny saws, and underneath it all, the faint, distant thump of artillery. Even when the fighting isn't close, it's always there, in the background, like a storm rumbling at the edge of your hearing. It seeps into your dreams, follows you when you wake, and never lets you forget where you are. You scratch at the rash forming under your collar, raw and red from weeks of damp fabric grinding against skin. Hygiene is a luxury you don't have. Showers don't exist out here. Only occasional splashes of muddy stream water when you can risk it. And even that comes with leeches clinging to your skin. Your uniform hasn't been properly cleaned since you arrived. It smells like mildew, smoke, and the faint sourness of fear sweat that never leaves. You tell yourself you'll get used to it, but the truth is, you never do. Breakfast isn't a feast. It's a pouch of rations that taste like cardboard soaked in salt. You chew slowly, because eating fast only makes you gag. The crackers crumble into dust in your mouth. The canned meat is greasy and metallic, and the instant coffee powder dissolved in tepid water is just bitter mud. But you force it down because you know the day will demand more from you than you think you have to give, and running on an empty stomach is a shortcut to collapse. Around you, others eat in silence, breaking the still air only with the sound of chewing and the occasional muttered curse about the food. Nobody complains too loudly. Complaints don't change anything. As you finish, you look out into the trees, the green wall that presses in on all sides. The jungle feels endless, like it's swallowing you whole. The canopy above blocks most of the sunlight, so the morning is still dim, heavy shadows stretching between the trees. Visibility is poor, always poor. You can barely see 10 feet ahead before the foliage swallows everything. It's both a shield and a trap. You can hide in it, but so can the enemy. Every rustle, every snapping twig, every bird suddenly taking flight makes your stomach tighten. You live in a constant state of readiness, nerves wound tight, waiting for the sound that means you'll have to grab your bag and run straight into the chaos. Your hands shake as you repack your kit, making sure everything is in its place. Morphine at the top, bandages rolled tightly, scissors within reach. You know the order by heart because when someone screams, you don't have time to think. You just reach, pull, and patch. It's muscle memory now, drilled into you not by training, but by necessity. And as you close the bag, hoist it onto your back, and feel the straps bite into your shoulders, you know the truth that every medic in this jungle knows. You're not here to survive. You're here to make sure someone else does. The morning has only just begun, and already you feel the weight pressing down. You stand, boots sinking slightly into the mud, rifle slung, but secondary, medical bag front and centre. Around you, the others shoulder their gear, weapons clattering softly, eyes darting nervously at the tree line. The day stretches ahead, like an endless road of heat, fear, and work that no one ever chooses. You glance at them, at the faces you may have to piece back together before the sun sets, and take a slow breath that tastes of mildew and smoke. Then you move forward, because in this place, stopping is never an option. The sun has barely risen, and already your skin feels like it's under siege. The air doesn't just wrap around you, it presses against you, smothering every breath before it can fill your lungs. It isn't like the dry heat of a desert or the crisp warmth of a summer back home. This is different. This is heat with weight. Heat you can hold in your hands. Heat that seeps into your bones and never lets go. You can feel it in your clothes, in your boots, in the damp cloth of your helmet liner that clings to your forehead like a wet rag. Nothing is dry here. Nothing ever will be. Your shirt is already soaked through before you've even taken 10 steps. The fabric clings to your back like a second skin. Every fold rubbing raw patches into your shoulders where your medical bag digs in. Sweat pours down your spine, dripping into your waistband where it collects until your trousers feel like they've been dipped in swamp water. Every movement squelches. The straps of your bag rub grooves into your shoulders, and because the skin is always wet, those grooves turn into sores that sting with every step. You've tried to adjust them, tried padding them with scraps of cloth, but it doesn't matter. The sweat soaks through everything, and the pain returns anyway. Your boots are no better. They trap the heat like ovens, filling with moisture until your socks are perpetually soaked. You change them when you can, but within minutes they're wet again. Your feet stay soft and white, skin peeling in strips, toenails lifting from the constant damp. You know men who have lost toes to rot simply because the jungle refuses to give them a moment of dryness. You can feel the grit of mud grinding between your toes with every step. And sometimes, when you peel the sock away, leeches are curled there, fat and black from feeding on you while you marched. You rip them off and salt the wounds, but they always come back. Everything always comes back in this place. Breathing is work here. Each inhale drags hot, heavy air into your chest, thick with the smell of wet earth, mildew, and sweat. It feels like your lungs are filling with steam. The air doesn't cool you. It just clings, heavier and heavier until you feel like you're drowning on dry land. Your helmet traps the heat even more, cooking your head until your hair sticks in greasy clumps to your scalp. Take it off, and you're exposed. Leave it on, and you stew inside it. Either way, you lose. The jungle canopy above traps everything beneath it. The leaves filter the sun, but instead of shade, it creates a kind of greenhouse, the heat bouncing back and forth between earth and sky, until it has nowhere to go but into you. You wipe your face with a rag, but it's useless. The cloth is already soaked through, smeared with sweat and grime. Within seconds, the salt stings your eyes again, dripping into open scratches on your cheeks, where branches tore at your skin during the last march. Every step you take is a battle with the ground. The mud pulls at your boots like it wants to swallow you whole. Sometimes it's ankle deep, sometimes knee deep, always sticky and slow. The harder you pull, the more it resists. The heat makes your muscles ache faster, every joint screaming under the constant strain of dragging your gear through muck that never ends. The jungle floor is a swamp in disguise, rotting leaves mixed with stagnant water that smells faintly of decay. And under it all, the insects thrive. They rise in swarms, clouds of mosquitoes that stick to your skin, your neck, the corners of your eyes, buzzing so loud you swear you can hear them inside your skull. Bug repellent doesn't help. It burns your skin, stings in open cuts, but the mosquitoes don't care. They bite through fabric, through sweat, through layers of mud you thought might protect you. The bites swell, itch until you scratch them raw, and then turn into open sores that fester in the damp heat. You've seen men feverish from infection, their skin streaked with angry red lines where the bacteria spread. The heat doesn't just exhaust you. It feeds every wound, every bite, every infection, turning them into enemies of their own. Your water ration is supposed to help, but the heat makes it a cruel joke. No matter how much you drink, your throat stays dry, cracked, raw from panting in the thick air. Each sip from your canteen tastes of metal and iodine, warm and stale. It doesn't refresh, it just reminds you of what clean water used to taste like. By midday, your lips split and bleed, your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth, and the sweat pouring off your body leaves white crusts of salt on your skin. Dehydration creeps in, even as you drown in your own perspiration. You drink, you sweat it out, and you're still thirsty. Always thirsty. The heat has its own smell. It's in the stench of your uniform, sour and musky from days of wear. It's in the rank odour of your socks, in the mildew growing on your gear, in the faint coppery tang of blood soaked into the fabric of your bag. It seeps into everything until you can't tell where the jungle ends and your own body begins. You reek like the jungle. The jungle reeks like you. The line is gone. Even the food suffers here. The rations turn rancid in the heat, the canned meat sweating oil when you open it, the crackers turning soft and musty. You choke them down anyway, chewing the paste like meat and forcing yourself to swallow as your stomach rolls in protest. Sometimes you don't eat at all, not because you aren't hungry, but because the thought of adding more heaviness to the swamp in your gut feels unbearable in this heat. Hunger gnaws at you, but the heat smothers it, making you too tired to care. When you pause to rest, there's no relief. The shade offers nothing. The sweat keeps pouring, dripping from your nose, your chin, down your chest, pooling in the creases of your uniform until your whole body feels slick. The ground beneath you radiates warmth, damp and fetid, pressing up against your legs until even sitting feels like punishment. The only breeze comes from the beating rotors of helicopters far overhead, but by the time it reaches you, it's just another push of hot air that stirs the leaves without cooling anything. Your skin pays the price for all of it. The constant dampness leaves you covered in rashes, fungal infections blooming under your arms, in the crooks of your knees, between your toes. The itching is relentless, a crawling sensation that keeps you awake at night and distracted during the day. You scratch until you bleed, but the wounds never heal in this heat. Instead, they weep and spread, leaving you raw and sore. Some men develop jungle rot so bad their legs swell like tree trunks, skin splitting open in weeping sores that never close. You know you might be next. You just hope your legs hold out long enough to keep moving. The heat affects your mind too. It makes you sluggish, every thought moving through molasses. You forget words, lose track of time, stare at the same patch of mud for what feels like hours without realizing it. Your body is screaming for rest, but there's no escape. Sleep doesn't help. You wake drenched in sweat, clothes plastered to your skin, no cooler than when you lay down. The heat follows you into your dreams, twisting them into feverish visions of drowning in your own sweat, of lungs collapsing under the weight of air too heavy to breathe. And then there's the sound. Heat makes the jungle louder. The buzzing of insects intensifies. The calls of birds echo sharper, and the distant artillery booms heavier in the thick air. Every noise feels closer, sharper, pressing against your ears until you can't separate one from the other. You're always listening, straining to pick out the sound that doesn't belong, the rustle that means danger. But the heat dulls your senses, makes you slower, makes you doubt yourself. Was that just the wind? Was it movement? You'll never know until it's too late. The worst part is knowing there's no end. There's no season where it cools, no time of day where it breaks. Night doesn't bring relief. It only brings darkness and mosquitoes. the heat still pressing down like a hand on your chest. You dream of cool air, of snow, of a single breath that doesn't burn your lungs. But when you wake, it's the same. Always the same. So you march, drenched and exhausted, dragging your gear through mud, your uniform sticking to your skin, your body itching, your mind foggy. You keep going, not because you can beat the heat, but because stopping means surrendering to it. And here, surrender is just another way of dying. Your clothes are supposed to protect you, but here they feel more like a punishment you can't escape. The uniform they gave you was designed in some distant office by someone who never spent a single day in the Vietnamese jungle. Olive green cotton, thick enough to hold up under hard use, stiff enough to keep its shape, but not made for this place. The first time you put it on, it felt heavy but bearable. After weeks of wear in the heat, in the mud, in the constant downpour, it's become a second skin you can't take off. The fabric never dries, not once. The air is so humid that even when the rain isn't falling, the sweat keeps it soaked through. You wake up damp, you move damp, you sleep damp. The shirt sticks to your chest and back like glue, chafing your shoulders raw under the straps of your bag. The trousers sag at the knees, stretched and stiff from mud that never really washes out. Every fold of fabric traps heat and moisture, rubbing your skin until rashes bloom across your body like an infection spreading under your clothes. You itch constantly, but scratching doesn't help. It just tears the skin open, giving the jungle one more place to dig its claws into you. There's no luxury of multiple outfits. You wear the same uniform day after day until it practically rots off your body. Washing it isn't an option. You can't stop to soak it in a river, not without leeches finding their way in, or worse, the enemy spotting you exposed in the water. When you do manage to rinse it, the water is filthy and full of bacteria. The shirt comes out smelling worse than before, damp with river rot instead of sweat. So you stop bothering. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. Everyone stinks the same way. The helmet doesn't help either. It's supposed to protect you from shrapnel, maybe even a bullet if you're impossibly lucky, but mostly it feels like a cooking pot clamped over your skull. The liner inside is damp with mildew. Your hair sticks to your scalp in greasy strands, and sores form where the rim rubs against your forehead. You want to take it off, let your head breathe, but you don't dare. A medic without his helmet is just a target waiting to be carried out by someone else. So you wear it, you sweat into it, you sleep with it at your side, because in this place you can't afford to be without it, no matter how much it suffocates you. Then there are the boots. They told you the jungle boots were special. Reinforced leather and canvas, drainage holes at the sides, soles made to grip the mud. They sounded practical, even clever. Out here, they're just another trap. The drainage holes don't drain the way they're supposed to. Instead, they let in mud, insects, and tiny stones that grind against your skin until you bleed. The canvas stays wet for days. Your socks cling like sponges, squishing with every step. By the end of the first week, your feet have gone soft, white, and swollen. The skin peels in strips, toenails loosen, blisters swell until they burst inside your boots. The smell that rises when you peel the socks away is so foul it makes your stomach turn. Jungle rot creeps in silently, the skin breaking down layer by layer until it feels like your own body is rejecting itself. You've seen men lose whole chunks of flesh this way. their feet balloon into infected masses, the skin blackening at the edges, the pain so bad they can barely stand. And yet, they keep walking, because what choice is there? The boots don't come off, not really. Once they're on, they stay on, until the day your tour ends or the day your legs give out, whichever comes first. Your belt digs into your hips, weighed down with canteens, pouches, and the knife you barely ever use. The straps of your medical bag carve into your shoulders, already tender from rashes. The fabric beneath the straps never dries, so the skin there is constantly rubbed raw, patches of pink and bleeding flesh that sting with sweat and salt. Every step feels like the uniform is eating into you. The worst part is the smell. Your clothes stink of mildew, of sweat, of the faint metallic tang of blood. The boots reek of rot and damp leather. The socks smell like death itself, sour and thick enough that you can taste it when you breathe. You carry that smell with you everywhere. It seeps into your skin until you can't tell where you end and the uniform begins. Even when the wind shifts and the jungle air momentarily clears, you catch the sour note of your own body and gag. There are no spare changes, no laundromats, no relief. You wear the same gear day and night. When it rains, it soaks through you. When the sun comes out, it bakes the dampness into you. At night, when you curl up in the mud trying to rest, the fabric stiffens as it dries in patches, turning brittle and rough. In the morning it's back to being soaked again. The cycle never ends. Even the gear that's supposed to protect you betrays you. The poncho, meant to shield you from rain, only traps the heat beneath it, turning you into a walking steam bath. The webbing straps across your chest cut into your ribs, and because the sweat never dries, they rub sores into your skin that never heal. You shift the weight from side to side, but it doesn't matter. The sores multiply anyway. And yet, you can't strip down. You can't peel the shirt off and march bare-chested through the jungle. The branches would tear your skin, the insects would devour you, and the sun would burn you raw within hours. The uniform is the only thing between you and 1,000 small deaths. You hate it, but you need it. You curse it, but you cling to it. Sometimes you catch yourself imagining what it would feel like to wear clean clothes again, to step into a dry pair of socks, to pull on trousers that don't stink of rot, to button a shirt that isn't stiff with salt. You imagine boots that fit like they should, leather that hasn't been waterlogged for weeks, soles that don't squish when you walk. You imagine lying down in pyjamas, in a bed, with sheets that smell faintly of soap instead of mildew. The thought alone feels unreal, like a memory borrowed from another life. Here there's only this, the endless damp, the endless sweat, the endless grind of fabric against skin. Your uniform is your cage, your boots are your burden, and your body pays the price every single day. You tell yourself you'll make it through, that you can endure just a little longer. But the truth is, the jungle doesn't care. It will wear you down, stitch by stitch, blister by blister, until you can't tell where the cloth ends and your suffering begins. Morning doesn't come gently here. There's no bird song drifting through an open window. No smell of bacon or fresh coffee waiting on the stove. In Vietnam, morning is just another word for less darkness. The jungle doesn't quiet down when the sun rises. It only shifts its rhythm. The insects change pitch, the birds scream louder, and the air gets hotter before you've even had a chance to rub the grit from your eyes. And then there's breakfast. You reach into your pack for a ration tin, already knowing what you'll find, already dreading it. They call it sea rations. Little olive drab cans packed with something that was supposed to resemble food when it left the factory years ago. Out here, in the damp heat, it's a punishment disguised as a meal. You pry one open with your knife, the metal lid popping with a faint hiss, and the smell that drifts out is enough to make your stomach lurch. Grease, salt, and metal all mixed together into something that clings to your nose. If you're unlucky, you pull the one everyone hates, ham and lima beans. The men call it ham and mother ears for a reason. The beans are mushy and sour, the ham is chewy and grey, and the whole thing floats in a slick layer of fat that coats your lips with every bite. You choke it down anyway, because there's nothing else. You shovel it into your mouth with the edge of your spoon, trying not to taste it, swallowing hard and fast. It sits in your stomach like a brick, heavy and unkind, but at least it's calories. Some mornings you get lucky. Spaghetti and meatballs, if you can call it that. A tangle of slimy noodles drowned in a red sauce that tastes faintly of tin and vinegar, dotted with meatballs that feel more like rubber than beef. Still, compared to the ham and beans, it feels like a feast. You eat it quickly, not because you enjoy it, but because if you think too much about what's actually in it, you'll lose your appetite completely. Every ration comes with a small accessory pack. A couple of crackers so dry they crumble into dust before you can chew them. A foil packet of instant coffee, some sugar cubes, maybe a stick of gum. The crackers break into sharp edges that scrape your tongue. The coffee tastes like burnt mud when you mix it with tepid water, and the gum loses its flavour after 3 chews. But you cling to them anyway, because they're the closest thing to normalcy you'll get all day. You chew the gum slowly, pretending it's something from home, something better than what it is. Cigarettes come in the pack too, 4 to a carton, tucked neatly beside the coffee. Even men who've never smoked before find themselves lighting up here, because in a place where you can't escape the heat, the bugs, or the fear, a cigarette is a small kind of relief. The smoke fills your lungs, masking the stink of sweat and mildew for a few minutes. The ember glows in the dim morning light, and for a moment you can pretend you're somewhere else. Not home, but at least not here. You sit in a circle with the others, everyone eating in silence. The only sounds are the scrape of spoons against cans, the crunch of crackers, the occasional cough. No one talks much in the morning. Words feel too heavy, and besides, what is there to say? Breakfast isn't something to enjoy. It's just another part of the grind, another box to tick before the day really begins. You eat because you have to, not because you want to. Hunger doesn't give you choices here. The heat doesn't make it easier. The grease in the food turns your stomach, the salt dries your mouth, and the coffee leaves you sweating even more than you already were. Sometimes you can't finish the ration. You push it away, leaving half the beans or the soggy noodles behind, but you know you'll regret it later. You'll be out in the field, your stomach gnawing at itself, wishing you had forced down just a little more in the morning. Regret doesn't change the taste though, so most mornings you eat until your throat threatens to gag. There's no fresh bread, no eggs, no milk. Fruit is a fantasy. Vegetables come in soggy lumps, preserved in brine until they've lost all texture. The only sweetness you ever taste comes from the hard candies sometimes tucked into the accessory packs. You suck on them slowly, letting the sugar dissolve on your tongue, stretching it out as long as you can. For a few minutes, the jungle fades, and you can almost pretend it's something from a corner store back home. But then the candy is gone, and you're back to the taste of metal and grease. Sometimes, if you're lucky, a supply drop includes something better. Fresh bread, real coffee, maybe even eggs powdered into a yellow paste that still somehow feels miraculous. The men cheer when that happens, voices rising in something close to joy. But those days are rare. Most mornings it's just another can, another cracker, another reminder that the war doesn't care about your appetite. You finish quickly, because time is never on your side. The cans are tossed into the mud, sometimes buried, sometimes just left there to rust among the leaves. The wrappers crinkle, the cigarette butts are ground into the dirt. Breakfast ends not with satisfaction, but with the sound of gear being strapped on, helmets adjusted, rifles slung. The taste of salt and grease lingers on your tongue, heavy in your stomach, weighing you down as you prepare to march back into the heat. And always, in the back of your mind, is the thought that this might be your last meal. Not in a dramatic sense, not in the way people at home talk about last suppers. Just in the quiet, gnawing realization that every time you eat, it could be the final time you scrape a spoon against a tin. That every can you open might be the last. And so you eat, no matter how much you hate it, no matter how much it turns your stomach. You eat because survival doesn't care about taste. Silence doesn't exist here, not even for a second. The jungle is alive at every hour, filling the air with a noise that drills into your skull and never lets you rest. The first thing you notice when you stop moving is the insects. They're not background noise. They're an army of sound. Cicadas scream from the trees with a shrill metallic buzz that rises and falls like some broken alarm. Mosquitoes whine near your ears, a thin, needling pitch that makes your skin crawl before you even feel the bite. Flies swarm over your face, over your food, over every wound you've tried to keep covered. It's constant, layered, and so loud that sometimes you can't hear your own thoughts. The hum isn't just one note. It shifts and overlaps, different species taking turns, as if the jungle runs on a schedule only the insects know. In the morning, it's the cicadas that dominate, their chorus building like static filling the air. By midday, the mosquitoes take over, clouds of them drifting from the swamps, buzzing in unison as they settle on every inch of exposed skin. At night, crickets chirp from the shadows, frogs croak from the water, and the mosquitoes keep coming anyway. It never stops. The jungle doesn't care if you're tired, if your ears are ringing, if you're desperate for even a minute of quiet. The jungle hums on. You swat at them constantly, but it doesn't matter. They bite through fabric, through sweat, through the thin patches of skin already raw from scratching. Your arms are a map of red welts, your neck peppered with swollen bumps, your hands covered in open sores where you've clawed at yourself in frustration. The sound alone is torture. That thin, high whine near your ear that makes you flinch, slap, curse under your breath, only for another one to take its place a second later. You can cover your face with a net, but it traps heat and makes it harder to breathe, so you trade one misery for another. Mixed into this constant insect chorus is another sound, one you can never ignore. The distant thump of helicopter rotors. Sometimes it's far off, low and faint, like a heartbeat carried through the air. Other times it's close, pounding against your chest, the blades chopping through the thick sky until the ground itself seems to vibrate. You hear it so often that it blends into the jungle noise. A second layer of hum that becomes part of your world. And yet, it's never just noise. Every time you hear it, you wonder what it means. Sometimes the helicopters bring supplies, crates of rations, boxes of ammunition, fresh bandages for your ever-empty bag. Other times they come to carry away the wounded, their bellies opening to swallow the broken bodies you've patched together with trembling hands. The thump of the blades is the sound of relief and the sound of loss all at once. You run toward it with the wounded slung over your shoulder, mud sucking at your boots, sweat blinding your eyes, shouting above the roar. The air kicks up dirt and leaves, whipping them into your face, and for a moment you can't see anything but the storm of debris. Then the stretcher is inside, the door slams, and the bird rises, carrying someone away from this green hell. Whether they make it home alive or not is a question you'll never have answered. There are darker times too, when the sound of rotors means something else. Gunships circling overhead, their machine guns rattling in the distance, rockets streaking through the trees, explosions booming louder than thunder. You hear the helicopters before you see them, the hum building into a roar, and then the sky itself seems to split apart. Even when they're miles away, you feel a sound in your bones. It shakes the air, rattles your teeth, sets your nerves on edge. You know when they're near that the fighting isn't far behind. At night, when you try to sleep, the sounds don't fade. The insects continue their shrill chorus, crawling into your dreams, drilling into your ears until you wake in a sweat, convinced they're inside your skull. And sometimes, just when exhaustion has finally pulled you under, the hum of rotors cuts through the night. You jolt awake, heart racing, unsure if it means reinforcements, evacuation, or another fight breaking out in the dark. You strain to listen, counting the seconds between each thump of the blades, trying to guess their distance, their direction, whether they're coming for you. Sleep never wins in those moments. The noise pulls you back, reminding you where you are. The combination of sounds wears you down in ways you can't explain. The insects make you itch. The helicopters make you tense. And together they create a soundtrack of constant unease. Even in rare moments of calm, you can't escape it. The hum stays in your ears long after the insects quiet down, long after the helicopters fade into the distance. It's as if the jungle has planted the noise inside you, a permanent buzzing under your skin. And yet you adapt. You stop expecting silence. You stop waiting for peace. You learn to live with the hum, to measure time by it, to use it as a reminder that you're still alive. The insects never stop biting, the helicopters never stop flying, and you never stop listening. Because here, in this place, sound is survival. Your bag is heavier than most of the rifles carried in your platoon, but it never feels full enough. You unzip it in the morning, the way a priest might open a reliquary, checking each item not because you trust it to save lives, but because you already know it won't. The contents are simple: rolls of gauze, pressure dressings, a handful of morphine syrettes, surgical scissors that rust at the joints from the constant damp, a scalpel, a few vials of antiseptic, and a scattering of pills. On paper, it sounds like a hospital in miniature. Out here, in the middle of the jungle, it's a cruel joke. When a man goes down, the kit feels like a child's toy compared to the damage you're facing. Shrapnel doesn't care how many bandages you packed. Bullets don't slow down because you only have 2 vials of morphine left. Arteries spill out faster than your hands can compress, and there's nothing in your kit that stops time. You press gauze into a wound and feel it soak through instantly, the fabric turning red and useless before you even unwrap the second roll. You use your own shirt when the gauze runs out, or tear strips from a poncho. Anything that might hold pressure for another minute. The morphine is rationed like treasure. Each cigarette is a slim tube with a needle attached, something you're supposed to jab into the thigh of a man screaming in pain. But there are never enough. You carry maybe 10 at a time, and you can go through them all in a single afternoon. You learn quickly who gets one and who doesn't. The ones with a chance of survival get the morphine. The ones who are bleeding out, who won't make it past the next hour, you hold back. You have to. You tell yourself it's mercy, that you're sparing the rest, but the truth sits heavy in your chest. You watch them writhe, hear them beg, and all you can do is whisper apologies while you clutch the last morphine cigarette in your pocket for the man you might still save. The scissors are blunt from use, the blades coated in rust, no matter how often you try to clean them. The antiseptic burns like fire in every cut, but you don't always have enough to go around. Sometimes you pour it straight into a wound, watching the man buck against the pain, knowing it's better than infection. Other times you just wash the wound with water you don't trust, praying the fever won't come later. You tie bandages as tight as you can, even when you know it will cut off circulation. You stuff wounds with gauze until the bag is empty, then improvise with socks, shirts, even handfuls of leaves when desperation makes you reckless. You have no blood to give, no transfusion bags, no plasma. You can't replace what spills out into the mud. You press, you wrap, you beg the bleeding to stop, but sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, all your bag can offer is a clean death. In training, they told you the kit was designed to be enough until evacuation. Patch them, stabilise them, and the helicopters would do the rest. Out here, in the thick jungle where rotors can't always land and radio calls vanish into static, evacuation is never guaranteed. Sometimes you carry a man for hours through sucking mud and tangled vines, your bag banging against your hip with every step, knowing that by the time you reach the clearing, he'll already be gone. Sometimes the helicopters come too late, and you're left with empty bandage wrappers and blood-stained hands. You learn to repurpose, to scavenge. Every wrapper, every scrap of cloth, every rubber glove is hoarded, cleaned, reused until it falls apart. You barter with other medics, trade cigarettes for extra rolls of gauze, beg the supply sergeant for more antiseptic, only to be told it's all gone. You start carrying things the army never issued: safety pins, sewing kits, razor blades. Anything sharp enough to cut, strong enough to hold. You become a collector of scraps, building your own kit from whatever the jungle and the army leave behind. The weight of the bag never changes, but it feels heavier every day. Not because of the supplies, but because of what it represents. Every time you lift it, you're reminded that the lives of the men around you are tucked into its pockets, hanging by the threads of gauze and the tips of dull scissors. They look at you differently because of it. When someone goes down, their eyes snap to you, not the sergeant, not the lieutenant. You, because you're the one who decides whether they'll keep breathing. And you know, deep down, that the bag on your back is too small for that burden. At night, you empty it out, laying the supplies on a poncho spread across the ground. You count them like coins, fingers tracing each roll of bandage, each tiny glass vial. You imagine the scenarios you'll face tomorrow. 3 men hit. 4. A mine goes off, tearing legs from bodies. A spray of bullets in the tree line. You measure your supplies against the visions in your head, and the math never works out. You never have enough. You never will. And so you sleep with the weight beside you, knowing that when dawn comes, you'll shoulder it again, walk back into the jungle, and hope that the day doesn't demand more than your bag can give. Before the jungle, before the heat, before the endless swarm of wounds you could never properly fix, there was training. They told you it would prepare you. They told you the drills would harden you for what was coming. In truth, it felt like a parody, like someone's idea of medicine reduced to a few chalkboard diagrams, rehearsed routines shouted by men who had never been within 10 miles of combat. They marched you into classrooms with buzzing fluorescent lights, the walls lined with posters of anatomy drawn in neat lines, every artery coloured in bright red, every vein a tidy blue. The mannequins laid out on the tables were spotless, their plastic skin free of dirt, their hollow eyes staring at the ceiling as you practiced tying perfect bandages that would never stay that neat in the mud. They drilled you on field dressings, made you wrap gauze around fake limbs until you could do it blindfolded, your hands moving on command like a machine. They taught you how to inject morphine into a rubber dummy, the needle sliding in smooth and easy, no muscle twitching in pain, no sweat or blood slicking your fingers. They gave you tourniquets to practice with, and you tightened them on cooperative classmates who smile through the exercise, their arms clean, unbroken, unbloodied. You were told that if you memorised the steps, you'd be ready for anything. Step 1. Apply pressure. Step 2. Secure the wound. Step 3. Wait for evacuation. Simple. But nothing in that sterile room prepared you for the sound of a man screaming while you fumbled for your gauze with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Nothing in those tidy diagrams taught you how to deal with a leg half blown away, the bone jutting out white and splintered, blood pumping so fast it sprayed your face before you even realised you were kneeling too close. The mannequins never thrashed, never clawed at you with desperate fingers while begging not to die. In training, no one ever looked you in the eyes with terror so raw it hollowed you out inside. They practiced timing you, making you patch a fake wound in under a minute, telling you that speed was everything. They barked the same phrases over and over until they stuck in your head. Apply pressure, wrap tight, move on. But when you got to the jungle, you realised speed wasn't the problem. It was the sheer chaos. Gunfire cracking overhead, men shouting orders, mud sucking at your knees while you tried to stop a real artery from spilling out in front of you. The stopwatch back at base never accounted for incoming fire, for grenades exploding so close your ears rang until you couldn't even hear the man you were trying to save. Training said 1 minute, reality said eternity. The instructors drilled you on neatness, as if a tidy bandage mattered. Out here, it didn't matter if the bandage was crooked, if the wrap looked like a child's knot. What mattered was pressure, speed, improvisation. You stuffed gauze into wounds like you were plugging holes in a sinking ship. You jammed shirts, socks, even handfuls of dirt against injuries when your supplies ran out, praying infection would come slower than the bleeding. There was no lesson plan for that. You remember practicing IVs in training, the instructors carefully guiding your hands to find the vein on a willing volunteer, the needle sliding in with hardly a flinch. In the field, you tried it while covered in sweat and blood, your hand slipping on the syringe, the veins collapsed from shock, the man writhing so violently you needed 2 others to hold him still. They never told you what to do when the needle snapped, when you missed the vein 3 times and knew the clock was running out. They taught you anatomy in perfect diagrams, but they never showed you what it looked like when it was torn apart. They never taught you how to tell a lung from a shattered rib when everything was just blood and fragments. They never taught you how to keep calm when a man's intestines spilled into your hands while he screamed for his mother. The diagrams didn't cover that part. Even the marching drills felt absurd in hindsight. Hours of running with weighted packs, practicing carrying mannequins across clean fields. They told you to build stamina, to get used to the load, but no amount of running on pavement prepared you for dragging a bleeding soldier through mud so thick it threatened to swallow you both whole. No weighted dummy prepared you for the limp heaviness of a man who'd already gone slack in your arms, his dead weight different, final. They gave you checklists, steps to follow, assess, diagnose, stabilize. You learned the acronyms, recited them in your sleep. But when the bullets started flying, you weren't thinking about acronyms. You weren't remembering checklists. You were acting on instinct, shoving hands into wounds, shouting for help, doing anything to buy another minute. The acronyms disappeared with the first firefight, replaced by a kind of frantic improvisation no manual had ever described. The cruelest part was how confident they sounded back in training. The instructors spoke with authority, their voices calm, certain, telling you this was all you needed to know. They never told you how it felt to watch someone die because your bag was empty. They never admitted that sometimes, no matter how perfectly you followed the steps, it wouldn't be enough. They didn't tell you that the weight of those failures would follow you longer than the war itself. When you think back on training, it feels like a different life. A classroom, a chalkboard, neat lines of blue and red on white paper. It feels laughable now. Out here, there's no chalk, no clean paper, no diagrams. Just blood, mud, and the sound of a man screaming your name while you fumble with supplies you know won't be enough. The first thing you learn when someone goes down is that the jungle doesn't care if you're ready. One moment, it's just the rhythm of boots, the hum of insects, the constant drip of sweat into your eyes. The next moment, there's a scream, sharp and raw, cutting through the noise like a blade. You're moving before you've even thought about it, bag slamming against your hip, rifle forgotten in the mud, your legs carrying you toward the sound, because that's your job. The bullets don't pause for you. The mortars don't stop falling. The mud doesn't firm up under your boots just because you need it to. Everything keeps happening, and you have to push into it anyway. When you reach him, there's no gentle way to check the damage. You drop to your knees in muck, hands already pulling at his gear, rolling him onto his back, trying to find where the blood is coming from. Sometimes it's obvious, spraying in a bright arc from an arm or leg torn open by shrapnel. Other times it's hidden, soaking his uniform from the inside, a dark patch spreading across the stomach or chest, hot against your fingers when you press down. He's screaming or he's silent, both equally terrifying, and the only thing you can do is get him out of there before the jungle finishes what the bullets started. The mud is always there, thick, sucking, clutching at your knees as you try to hoist him up. His weight is heavier than it should be because it isn't just him. It's his rifle, his pack, his helmet, his boots filled with water. You grab him under the arms, drag him backward, your boots slipping, your spine feeling like it's snapping with every pull. He groans, begs, curses. Sometimes he thrashes, and every movement makes it harder. The mud pulls at both of you, like it wants to keep him, and you feel it drag at your strength until your muscles burn. When you can, you get help. Another set of hands, sometimes two. You link your arms under his shoulders, lift him between you, stumble forward step by step. The jungle doesn't clear a path for you. Branches whip at your face, vines tangle your legs, roots catch your boots until you trip and nearly fall. The air is thick with smoke, the ground trembling with the nearby blasts. Every step feels like a gamble. Will you make it 10 feet farther? Or will another burst of gunfire drop someone else at your side? If the fire is too heavy, there's no time to wait for a stretcher. You improvise with ponchos, rifles slid through the grommets to make handles, or just a tarp pulled under him while 4 men grip the corners. The poncho sags, the weight bending it until it nearly scrapes the ground, and you're all stumbling under it, panting, swearing, legs shaking as you try to move faster than the bullets chasing you. The mud splashes up your legs, sweat stings your eyes, your shoulders feel like they're tearing apart, but you don't stop. You can't stop. Sometimes you carry him on your back, fireman's carry, his arm dangling over your shoulder, his blood dripping into the back of your neck. You stagger forward with his weight pressing down, every step a fight against the mud, sucking at your boots. His breath is hot against your ear if he's still alive. If he's not, the silence is worse, but you carry him anyway. Because out here, leaving someone behind isn't an option. The fire doesn't pause for you. Bullets crack through branches above your head, bark splinters showering down. Mortar blasts shake the ground so hard your teeth rattle. The wounded man screams with every explosion, every jolt as you stumble. You try to shout back reassurances, words you don't believe, promising he'll be okay, promising you're almost there. You say it more for yourself than for him. The worst part is the distance. It's never close. The clearing for evacuation is always farther than you think, every step stretching into miles. The mud makes you slow, the weight makes you slower, and the fire makes every second feel like it could be the last. You drag him 1 foot at a time, your legs trembling, lungs burning, sweat pouring down your back in rivers. You feel like you're drowning on dry land, and still the clearing is just out of reach. When you finally see it, it's chaos. The helicopter hovering low, rotors chopping the air into a storm of dirt and leaves, the ground kicking up into your face, blinding you. The roar is deafening, drowning out the gunfire for a moment but not silencing it. You stagger forward, pushing through the storm, trying not to drop him as the wind shoves you sideways. The crew is shouting, their arms waving, but you can't hear them over the roar. You just keep moving, step by step, until hands grab him from you and haul him inside. And then it's over, at least for him. He's gone, carried away by the bird, and you're left standing in the clearing, chest heaving, clothes soaked with sweat and blood that isn't yours. The helicopter lifts, the sound fading, and you look back toward the jungle because you know the fight isn't finished. There will be another scream, another body to drag, another bag to empty, and the mud will still be waiting to swallow your boots when you run. The jungle has its own sounds, but when the gunfire starts, it drowns everything else. The insects vanish first. That constant whine that had drilled into your skull all morning cuts off like someone flipped a switch. Birds go silent. Frogs stop croaking. The only thing left is the snapping of branches, the pounding of boots, and then the crack of rifles splitting the air so sharp it makes your stomach knot. Gunfire isn't clean. It isn't like the distant pops you hear on a firing range back home. Out here it comes in bursts, unpredictable, echoing off the trees so that you can't always tell where it's coming from. 1 second it's close enough to feel the shock against your chest. The next it's far off. A hollow thump swallowed by the foliage. You drop low without thinking, body pressed into mud that smells of rot. Your heart hammering louder than the rifles. The sound becomes the world. Automatic fire rips through the jungle like tearing cloth, so fast it blends into a single roar. Single shots crack like breaking wood, sharp enough to make your ears ring. And underneath it all is the deeper percussion of machine guns, steady and relentless, pounding in your chest until you swear your ribs are vibrating. You know that every sound means metal flying through the air at impossible speed, and you can't see any of it until it hits. You hear it hiss past your ear, snapping twigs, chipping bark. Each near miss is a whisper, reminding you that the next one might not miss at all. And then there's the smell. Gunpowder doesn't just hang in the air. It sinks into it, heavy and acrid, burning your throat with every breath. The first whiff makes your eyes sting. The second coats your tongue in bitterness. The third feels like it's filling your lungs with ash. It mixes with the damp air until every breath tastes like fire and metal. Even after the firefight ends, it lingers, seeping into your clothes, clinging to your hair. You smell it hours later, lying awake in the dark, a reminder that the jungle never let you breathe clean air again. Smoke curls between the trees, grey and choking. It clings low to the ground, rolling through the underbrush until you're crawling in it, eyes watering, chest heaving. It mingles with the smell of mud, sweat and blood, creating a stench so thick you can't escape it. Every firefight leaves the air poisoned for hours. You can scrub your face, splash water over your mouth, but the taste of powder stays. Your ears never recover. The sound is too close, too sudden, too loud. Every burst leaves them ringing. A high-pitched whistle that drowns out voices. Men shout orders, scream warnings, call for medics, but it all blends into a muffled roar behind the ringing. You learn to read lips, to follow gestures, because the sound of gunfire leaves you deaf more often than not. And when it's finally quiet again, the ringing doesn't fade. It stays with you, buzzing through the silence, reminding you that quiet doesn't really exist anymore. What rattles you most isn't just the volume, but the randomness. Gunfire never starts when you expect it. It comes in the middle of a march, in the dead of night, when you're bent over tying a bootlace, when you're reaching for a ration tin. It explodes into your world without warning, and you go from stillness to chaos in the time it takes to blink. The crack, the roar, the screams, they arrive all at once, and you're already on the ground, heart in your throat, fingers fumbling for bandages before you've even registered what's happening. Grenades add another layer. The sharp pop as the pin is pulled, the hollow clunk as it lands in the mud, the half second of silence before the explosion. And then the world breaks apart. The blast is louder than anything else, shaking the ground, showering dirt, leaves and pieces of things you don't want to identify. The smell is worse. Burning powder mixed with scorched earth and the copper tang of blood. Your hands tremble as you crawl toward the wounded, the smoke stinging your eyes, the ringing in your ears so sharp it feels like knives. Sometimes the firefight drags on for hours. The sound becomes constant, the air so thick with powder smoke you can barely see your own hands. Your throat burns from breathing it, your nose runs, your eyes swell, and still the shooting continues relentless. The jungle itself seems to shiver under the onslaught, leaves shredded, branches falling, earth torn apart. You lose track of time. The minutes stretch into something shapeless, defined only by the endless noise and the reek of powder filling every breath. And when it finally stops, when the last shot echoes into silence, the jungle doesn't come back right away. The insects don't resume their chorus. The birds don't call. There's just an emptiness, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of smouldering trees. The smell lingers, sharp and chemical, burning your throat long after the guns have gone quiet. It clings to your gear, your skin, your hair. You carry it with you until the next firefight, when the cycle begins again. You start to recognize the smell as a warning. You smell it before you hear the shot sometimes, drifting on the wind from fighting farther ahead. It seeps into your nose, a sting that tightens your chest, and you know before the first crack that it's about to start again. You tighten your grip on the bag, brace your legs, and wait for the sound that will drag you forward once more. You learn very quickly that morphine and bandages are all you really have, and both run out faster than you can believe. When a man goes down, the blood is always more than you remember from the last time. It doesn't ooze, it doesn't drip. It pours, hot and fast, soaking your hands before you can even pull the gauze from your bag. You press the bandage hard into the wound, your whole weight leaning into it, mud squishing under your knees, the sound of gunfire pounding in your ears. The fabric darkens instantly, crimson spreading across it until it feels useless before you even tie it off. You grab another, then another, until your bag feels lighter, and the ground around you is wet with both blood and sweat. The bandages are supposed to buy time, nothing more. You know this. They aren't cures, they aren't miracles, they're stopgaps. They hold the blood inside for another minute, maybe two, long enough to drag him to cover, long enough to shout for a stretcher, long enough to pray the helicopter will arrive before the blood soaks through everything you own. You wrap limbs until they look like mummies, your hands slick, trembling, covered in dirt and flesh that clings under your fingernails. You know you should change gloves, clean the wound, do everything by the book. But the book was written for classrooms, not jungles. Here, there is only the next bandage, the next scream, the next roll of gauze that feels thinner every time you touch it. And then there's the morphine. Those slim metal syrettes you keep tucked where you can grab them fast. You break one open, jab it into the thigh, push the plunger, and hope it works before he thrashes himself into shock. The relief is almost immediate when it does. The moans soften, the frantic clawing at your arms weakens, the eyes glaze with something like calm. It feels like magic, a tiny reprieve pulled from your bag, but the magic never lasts. Sometimes it wears off before you've even gotten him out of the mud. Sometimes there isn't enough to go around, and you have to decide who gets it and who doesn't. That's the part they never trained you for. They told you morphine was pain relief, nothing more, nothing less. They didn't tell you it would become a decision about mercy. You look at a man with his chest torn open, lungs bubbling pink froth with every shallow gasp, and you know he isn't going to make it. You can use the morphine to ease him, or you can save it for someone who has a chance. Either way, the choice is yours, and it feels like a weight no one should ever carry. Sometimes you give it anyway, whispering into his ear that it'll be okay, even when you both know it won't. Sometimes you hold back, pocketing the last cigarette while he writhes in agony, and those are the moments that haunt you long after the jungle goes quiet. The prayers come when the supplies are gone. You don't have time to kneel, to fold your hands, to speak them out loud. They come in fragments, half-formed thoughts muttered under your breath as you press your palms against a wound you can't close. Please let the bleeding stop. Please let him breathe again. Please let the helicopter come. Sometimes you don't even know who you're speaking to. God, fate, the jungle itself. It doesn't matter. You pray because there's nothing else left when the bandages are soaked through and the morphine is gone. The smell of blood mixes with the smell of antiseptic, sharp and chemical. A sting in your nose that never fully clears. Your hands are always stained, the skin cracked from the constant contact with fluids, the nails black with grime. You wipe them on your trousers, but it doesn't help. The stains sink in, permanent reminders you carry on your skin. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, as long as the man under your hands keeps breathing, but when he doesn't, you notice every red mark that won't wash away. Improvisation becomes your only skill. When the gauze runs out, you use socks. When the morphine is gone, you whisper lies to calm them. When you have nothing left, you press down with your bare hands, feeling the life pumping out between your fingers, and you don't stop until someone pulls you back and shakes their head. That's when the prayers come hardest, muttered through clenched teeth, swallowed so no one hears. The bag always feels too light when you pack it at night. You count the bandages, the syrettes, the tiny bottles of antiseptic, and you know it won't be enough for tomorrow. It's never enough. You tuck them away anyway, zip the bag closed, and hope. Not because you believe it'll be different, but because hope is the only thing that keeps your hand steady when the next scream tears through the jungle. It's one thing to patch up a stranger, someone whose name you barely remember from roll call. It's another thing entirely when it's a man who sat beside you last night, eating the same rations, cursing the same heat, trading jokes that weren't really funny but felt necessary anyway. Out here, everyone becomes family faster than you can believe. You sleep side by side, march step for step, share the same mud, the same fear. And when one of them goes down, it doesn't feel like patching a body anymore. It feels like trying to hold on to a piece of yourself that's slipping away. You hear the voice first. It's familiar. Too familiar. The scream cuts through the noise, and you don't have to think. You already know who it belongs to. Your stomach drops as you run toward it, praying you're wrong, praying it's someone else. But when you drop to your knees and see his face, the world narrows to that single terrible moment. He looks at you with wide, panicked eyes, clutching at a wound that's spilling more than you can stop. And you freeze for a fraction of a second, because this isn't just another soldier. This is someone you know. Someone who laughed with you in the rain. Someone who passed you his last cigarette. Someone who reminded you that you were human in a place designed to strip that away. Your hands move anyway, because they have to. Gauze pressed hard. Morphine jabbed into his thigh. Your voice rising over the gunfire, shouting his name, telling him to hold on. You lie to him without hesitation. You tell him it's not that bad, that he'll be okay, that the helicopter is on its way. You can't let him see the truth in your eyes, so you force your face into something steady while inside you're unravelling. The blood keeps coming. The gauze soaks through. You switch to another roll, then another, your bag growing lighter as your fear grows heavier. He grabs your wrist sometimes, squeezes so hard it hurts, begging you not to let him die. And you promise. You promise again and again, even when you know you can't keep it. The words taste like ash in your mouth, but you say them anyway, because what else is there to give him in that moment? Bandages and promises, morphine and lies. When his breathing slows, every second feels like a countdown you can't stop. You listen to the rattling in his chest, that wet, bubbling sound that tells you the wound is deeper than your hands can reach. You know, the textbooks back home would call it a sucking chest wound, something you're supposed to seal with plastic. Out here, you don't always have it, so you tear a wrapper from a ration pack, slap it over the hole, and press with both hands while he chokes on every breath. You pray it buys enough time, just enough for a stretcher, for a helicopter, for anything that isn't this patch of mud where you're kneeling. Sometimes it works. Sometimes he makes it through, carried off the field, bloodied but alive. And sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes you feel the grip on your wrist loosen, the eyes go glassy, the chest still. You press harder anyway, refusing to stop. Your own breath coming in frantic gasps, as if you can force life back into him by sheer will. Someone has to pull you off, shake you, tell you it's over. And you look down at the face you knew, the face you ate with, marched with, lived beside, and it feels like part of you has been ripped away and left bleeding in the dirt. The worst part comes later, in the quiet. When the fight is over and the wounded are gone, when you sit with your back against a tree, bag empty, hand stained, and you realise you'll never hear his voice again. The jokes, the curses, the muttered prayers before sleep, all gone. You replay the moment over and over, wondering if you missed something, if there was one more bandage, one more trick you could have tried. The guilt settles in like the damp air, heavy and impossible to shake. And it doesn't happen once. It happens again and again. Each time you tell yourself you'll be ready, that you'll handle it better, but you never do. Every friend you lose feels like the first, a fresh wound carved into your chest that never fully heals. You bury it deep because you have to keep moving, have to keep patching the next man, but the weight grows heavier with every name you carry. There are nights you lie awake, staring at the dark canopy above, listening to the insects and the distant thump of artillery, and you whisper their names like a roll call no one else will ever hear. You whisper them because you're afraid if you don't, you'll forget, and forgetting feels worse than anything else feels. Sleep never comes easy in the jungle, and when it does, it's never clean. The sounds don't stop just because your eyes close. Helicopters in the distance, artillery rumbling miles away, the constant insect chorus that fills every crack of silence. When you do drift off, it's shallow, restless, and the dreams that come are worse than being awake. You wake sweating, heart hammering, throat raw from sounds you don't remember making. But it's not just at night. Out here the nightmares find you in the middle of the day, when the sun is bright and the jungle is alive, and they hit just as hard. Sometimes you'll be kneeling in the mud, changing a bandage when it flashes across your vision. A face from last week, twisted in pain, eyes staring wide as the life drained out. Suddenly right there in front of you. For a second, you forget where you are. The man under your hands blurs into the one you lost, and your stomach drops as if it's happening all over again. You blink, shake your head, force yourself back into the moment, but the image lingers, burned into the backs of your eyelids. The heat doesn't help. The air is heavy, pressing on you like a weight, and exhaustion makes your mind slip in and out of focus. You'll catch yourself drifting, eyelids sagging in the middle of a march, and that's when it strikes. 1 second, you're staring at the back of the man in front of you, his boots sinking into the mud. The next second you see him fall, chest ripped open, screaming for you. It isn't real this time, but your body doesn't know the difference. Your heart pounds, your hands tremble, and it takes minutes before you trust what your eyes are seeing again. The smell of gunpowder can drag you back without warning. You catch a faint trace of it on the wind, left over from a skirmish miles away, and suddenly you're back in the thick of it. Your ears ring, your throat burns, and you swear you can feel the heat of the blast against your skin. You look around and see only trees, only the slow sway of branches in the humid air. But your body stays locked in that moment, braced for the next explosion. Even simple things turn into triggers. The snap of a twig underfoot sounds like the crack of a rifle. A helicopter passing overhead during daylight resupply feels like the start of another firefight. You tense, shoulders hunched, every muscle ready to move before your brain catches up and reminds you there's no fight this time. The reaction is automatic, you can't control it. The worst are the hallucinations born from exhaustion. You'll be awake, eyes open, but your mind plays tricks. You see shapes moving in the trees, figures crouching in the brush, shadows that flit just out of reach. Sometimes it's enemies you imagine, weapons pointed, waiting for you to slip. Sometimes it's the wounded you couldn't save, stumbling toward you, mouths open in silence, blood pouring down their chests. You rub your eyes, shake your head, mutter curses under your breath, but the visions cling for seconds that feel like hours. You can't escape it by staying awake either. When the body is this tired, the mind rebels. It drops you into half dreams while you're still standing, leaning against a tree with your rifle slung over your shoulder, eyes half closed. That's when the nightmares crawl in without permission. You'll jerk awake to the sound of your own gasp, heart racing, men around you staring, and you can't explain what just happened. They don't ask. They all have their own. Sometimes the nightmares mix with reality so thoroughly you can't tell them apart. You're treating a man on the ground, pressing a bandage into his stomach, and in your mind you're also back with another, one who didn't make it, one whose name you still whisper in the dark. You blink, shake your head, keep working, but the overlap feels wrong, like your mind is splitting in two. You're in the present and the past at the same time, both equally real, both equally heavy. There's no clock out here, no shift to end, no safe bed waiting at the end of the day. Every hour bleeds into the next, and your mind never has time to sort through the images piling up inside it. So they come back whenever they want. While you eat, while you march, while you try to catch your breath. The nightmares don't wait for night. They come whenever they feel like it, and you have no choice but to endure them. You learn to hide it after a while. You keep your face steady, your hands moving, because the men around you need to believe you're in control. You don't tell them that sometimes, while you're wrapping a bandage or pressing morphine into a thigh, you're fighting your own private battle against memories that won't stay buried. You don't tell them how often the faces of the dead blur into the faces of the living, or how many times you've whispered a friend's name under your breath before realizing he isn't the one in front of you. You just keep working, keep moving, because admitting the truth would break you faster than the jungle already has. And when the day drags on into another night, and you finally do close your eyes, the nightmares are waiting for you there too. It doesn't matter if it's daylight or darkness, awake or asleep. They follow you everywhere, shadows stitched into your thoughts, replaying over and over until you forget which moments were real and which were only dreams. The rain didn't fall sometimes. It lived there. It was part of the jungle, stitched into every leaf, every patch of ground, every breath you tried to take. The air was already thick enough to choke you. But when the sky opened, it pressed down harder, turning the world into a wet, endless prison. You'd wake to it, pounding on the tin of your helmet, soaking through canvas, dripping onto your face before you'd even rolled upright. There was no waiting it out, no chance it would pass in a few minutes. It came in sheets that blurred the trees together, came in a constant drizzle that sank into every seam of your uniform, came in sudden bursts that felt like buckets being dumped from above. Your gear never dried, not once. Boots stayed waterlogged, squelching with every step, the skin on your feet softening, peeling, raw. Socks stayed soaked even when you changed them, because the fresh pair was already damp before you even pulled them on. Bandages, carefully packed in plastic, still ended up damp by the time you needed them, the edges curling, the fabric musty and weakened. When you tried to press them into a wound, they clung with mud and blood. Never clean, never sterile. You worked with what you had, but the rain made sure everything felt contaminated before it even touched the skin. The noise of it was constant. A roar when it hammered against the canopy. A hiss when it drifted in steady streams. It drowned out voices, muffled shouts, blurred the difference between gunfire far off and thunder rolling close. Sometimes it was a shield, hiding you under its curtain. Other times it was a trap, covering the sound of movement until the enemy was right on top of you. You learned to live with it, but you never trusted it. The smell changed, too. Wet earth mixed with mildew, gear growing mould in real time, flesh rotting faster when the wounds weren't covered enough. The rain carried every odour with it, spreading the stink of blood and sweat until the whole jungle seemed saturated with it. Even your food tasted of damp. Your cigarettes went soft before you could finish them. Your hands pruned and raw, as if you'd been submerged for days. And the cold. It wasn't a clean chill. It was a damp, creeping cold that crawled under your skin and stayed there. Even in the suffocating heat, the rain could make you shiver uncontrollably, your teeth clacking together while sweat and water mixed on your body in the strangest, most uncomfortable way. You couldn't tell if you were freezing or boiling, only that you were miserable either way. Carrying the wounded through the rain was another nightmare. The mud deepened until it sucked boots clean off. Stretchers slid, tilted, nearly spilled men into puddles deep enough to swallow them. The rain washed blood away in rivers, turning every clearing into a smear of red and brown. Sometimes that was worse, watching the evidence of their injury dilute and vanish, as if the jungle was erasing them before they were even gone. You pressed harder with your bandages, knowing the water would seep in anyway, knowing the fabric would never stay dry long enough to do its job. Sleeping was impossible. You lay in puddles, water dripping down the back of your neck, your clothes sticking to your skin like a second layer you could never peel off. You'd curl into yourself under ponchos that leaked at the seams, every gust of wind driving the rain sideways across your face. You'd close your eyes, but the patter on leaves, the endless dripping, the squelch of mud beneath shifting bodies, it kept you half awake, half drowning. The rain bred disease as fast as it ruined gear. Trench foot, skin infections, fevers that spread faster when men were constantly damp. Cuts that should have healed in days turned black around the edges, the moisture feeding bacteria until they festered. You tried to keep wounds dry, but it was impossible. Every attempt felt like trying to fight the ocean with a strip of cloth. Morale sank as low as the puddles you waded through. Men stopped talking. Cigarettes went out before they were smoked. Letters from home smudged into illegible ink. The rain stripped away everything: warmth, rest, even hope. It pressed down on you until you forgot what it felt like to be dry, forgot there was a world beyond endless water, mud, and grey skies. And yet you still had to work. The rain didn't pause for you to patch wounds. It didn't ease while you tried to drag someone to cover. It poured, harder sometimes, blinding you, filling your eyes, your nose, your mouth, until you sputtered while trying to call for supplies. Your hands slipped on wet flesh, the bandages soaked through instantly, the morphine syringe slick between your fingers. You cursed the sky, cursed the jungle, cursed every drop as you tried to keep someone alive in conditions that seemed designed to drown them faster. It was relentless, and it never let you forget that in Vietnam, even the weather was an enemy. The jungle didn't need bullets to kill you. It had its own arsenal, quieter, but just as merciless. Out here, sickness was everywhere, creeping into your body with every breath, every sip of water, every step you took through the mud. The bullets and shrapnel were sudden. They tore a man apart in an instant. But disease was slower, crueler, eating away at him piece by piece until he was just as broken as if he'd been hit in the chest. Malaria was the constant enemy. Men shook so hard with fever, their teeth rattled like dice in a cup. One day they'd be sweating rivers, faces bright red, clothes plastered to their bodies. The next they'd be shivering so violently you had to hold them down to stop them from biting their own tongues. Quinine and chloroquine were passed around, bitter pills that barely kept the worst at bay, but they weren't cures. They were thin shields, and often the fever broke right through. As a medic, you carried the pills, handed them out, prayed they would work, and still watched men collapse mid-march, their bodies burning hot in the suffocating humidity. Then there was dysentery. It didn't sound like much compared to bullets, but it could wreck an entire squad in days. Men doubled over in the brush, too weak to stand, their strength draining out faster than any wound could bleed. Dehydration set in quick. You'd try to force water down their throats, but the water itself was poison half the time, filled with bacteria from the rivers and puddles you had no choice but to drink. Chlorine tablets helped sometimes, but never enough. You mixed salt and sugar into canteens, tried to keep them upright, tried to keep them moving, but dysentery hollowed them out, left their faces pale and their eyes sunken. Bodies wasting away even while the fight pressed on. Skin infections were everywhere. A cut from a thorn, a scrape from crawling through the brush, even just the constant damp rubbing raw spots on their feet. All of it turned into festering sores. The humidity fed bacteria like a feast. Wounds ballooned with pus, stank so badly you could smell them before you even peeled back the bandage. You drained them with whatever you had, pressed iodine into the openings, listened to the man hiss through his teeth as the burn shot up his leg. There was never enough ointment, never enough clean dressings, never enough time to treat every infection before another one appeared. The leeches made everything worse. They clung to ankles, thighs, even inside boots. You didn't notice them until you saw the blood or felt the squirm. Pulling them off was messy. They left wounds behind, tiny but open, ready to rot in the damp. Fungus thrived in the same way, blooming across skin until men scratched themselves raw. Jungle rot chewed away at feet until they turned black, the flesh soft and crumbling, the stench unmistakable. Sometimes the only solution was to cut boots wider, wrap the foot loosely, and pray it lasted another march. Hepatitis struck too, yellowing the whites of eyes, swelling livers until men could barely stand. Fevers came and went, sometimes lasting weeks. As a medic, you could only watch, give fluids when you had them, whisper encouragement while knowing there wasn't much you could do. And then there was the slow creeping horror of parasites, worms that wriggled unseen inside bellies, bloating men, draining them, ringworm and hookworm leaving angry welts, invisible enemies chewing from the inside out. They weren't dramatic, they weren't loud, but they ground men down until they were barely able to lift a rifle. What made it worse was the helplessness. With bullets and shrapnel, you had something to fight with. Bandages, morphine, pressure, stitches. With disease, you often had nothing. A few pills, some powder, maybe a clean rag if you were lucky. Most of the time, you were reduced to watching, trying to keep the man comfortable while his body fought a battle you couldn't join. You'd see the strength drain from their eyes, their muscles slacken, their voices weaken until they were just whispers. And all you could do was sit beside them, fan them with a scrap of cardboard, and pray. The jungle made no distinction. It ate everyone the same. Even the strongest went down. The men who seemed untouchable, the ones who charged forward without fear, ended up curled in the mud, shivering with fever, groaning with cramps, begging for water you didn't dare give them too much of. Disease stripped them of their bravado, stripped them of their strength, until they were just like everyone else, fragile, breakable, waiting to see if the jungle would spare them this time. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes men didn't die from bullets at all. They died from infection, from fevers, from diarrhea that wouldn't stop. They wasted away in a place where the enemy didn't even have to fire a shot. And those deaths felt different. They felt unfair. They weren't even given the dignity of going down in the fight. They were stolen by the air, the water, the very ground under their feet. For a medic, it was a war on two fronts. You patched holes made by bullets, and you tried to keep men alive against an enemy you couldn't see, one that didn't care how brave they were. And some days, you wondered which one was worse. The firefight that tore through a squad in minutes, or the sickness that hollowed them out day by day until nothing was left. Getting a man to a helicopter was never guaranteed. They told you in training that air evacuation would save lives, that helicopters could scoop up the wounded and rush them to field hospitals in minutes. And sometimes it worked that way. Sometimes the system clicked. The pilots swooped in like angels, and a man who should have died on the ground made it home alive. But most of the time, it was a gamble. Every request felt like tossing a coin, waiting to see if the jungle, the weather, and the enemy would let that coin land on your side. The first step was calling it in. You'd be kneeling in the mud, one hand pressed into a man's chest wound, the other gripping the radio handset, slick with blood and rain, shouting coordinates that might or might not be right, because the map was already smeared from the weather. The operator on the other end would confirm, say they were scrambling a bird, and you'd wait. That waiting was the longest stretch of time you'd ever endure. Minutes stretched into hours. Every breath the wounded man took felt like one closer to the last, and you couldn't tell him if the helicopter would arrive in time. The jungle made it harder. No open fields, no clear spaces. You had to find a hole in the canopy, or make one with explosives, hacking and blowing just to give the rotors room to land. Sometimes the pilots had to hover above the trees, lowering lines while the downdraft tore the leaves off branches, blasting grit into your eyes. You'd try to keep the stretcher steady while the rotor wash whipped up mud, dust, rain and debris, turning the landing zone into a storm. Your eyes watered, your ears rang, your lungs choked on dirt, but you couldn't let go of the stretcher. If you lost your grip, the man on it was gone for good. The enemy knew how important the helicopters were. They knew the sound of those blades cutting through the air, and they knew it meant someone was vulnerable. Too many times, a landing zone turned into a trap. The enemy opened fire the moment the bird appeared, the noise of rifles and machine guns mixing with the thundering rotors until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Pilots tried to hold steady, but sometimes they had to pull away under fire, lifting off before you could load the wounded. Watching a helicopter vanish back into the sky while you knelt in the mud with a dying man under your hands was its own kind of torment. And sometimes the bird didn't even come. Weather turned bad, fog rolled in, rain pounded too heavy, or the fighting nearby was too thick, the risk too high. The radio went quiet after a while, and you knew you'd been left on your own. You couldn't blame the pilots. They had their own orders, their own survival to think about. But that didn't make it easier when you had to look down at the man bleeding out and know that his only chance just evaporated into static. Even when the helicopter did arrive, the clock was still against you. Loading a stretcher under fire was chaos. Men slipping in the mud, boots sliding, hands shaking as they lifted the weight of someone who groaned with every jostle. You shouted over the noise, tried to direct them, tried to keep the stretcher level, but every second felt like a struggle. By the time you pushed him into the bay and the doors slammed shut, you were already soaked in sweat and grime, chest heaving, ears ringing from the roar. You'd step back, shielding your face as the blast of rotor wash ripped through the clearing, and watch the helicopter rise into the sky. And then you'd stand there staring, wondering if he would make it, or if you'd just sent him off to die somewhere else. There were times you loaded 3, 4 men into a single bird, their bodies piled close, IVs dangling, blood pooling on the metal floor. You climbed in with them when there was space, straddling legs, pressing bandages tighter, shouting vitals to crewmen who could barely hear you. The noise inside was deafening, a scream of engine and blade that vibrated in your bones. The air reeked of fuel, sweat and blood, and you held on tight as the bird swayed, dipped and climbed. You prayed the pilot would keep steady, prayed the bird wouldn't take fire on the way out, prayed the man under your hands would hold on for just a few more minutes, But you couldn't always ride along. Most of the time you stayed behind. You loaded the wounded, watched the bird lift, and felt the emptiness settle in your gut. You never knew what happened next. No one radioed back to say if he made it. Days later, you might hear through rumour that he'd pulled through. Other times, nothing. Silence. You carried that silence with you, adding it to the list of questions you'd never have answers for. The gamble wasn't just whether the bird would come, it was whether the man would last long enough to reach it. You pressed bandages into wounds, injected morphine, whispered in ears. But sometimes you felt the life drain out just as the helicopter was coming into view. The sound of the blades growing louder was supposed to bring relief, but instead you felt the weight in your arms go slack, the chest under your palms go still, and you knew he'd never see the inside of the bird. You kept working anyway, refusing to give up. But deep down you knew the jungle had already won. There were also the times when the helicopter itself didn't survive. You'd see them hit, smoke trailing, the whine of engines failing as they spiraled into the trees. You watched men die not from bullets or sickness, but because the one machine meant to save them became a coffin falling from the sky. The gamble was brutal, unforgiving, and it never gave back what it took. And still, every time the call came in, you hoped. You listened for the thrum of blades in the distance, lifted your head from the mud, and scanned the sky. Because sometimes, against all odds, the gamble paid off. Sometimes a man who should have been gone made it home alive because the helicopter did come, because the bird did hold steady under fire, because the stretcher made it inside just in time. You clung to those rare victories like lifelines, because without them, the gamble wouldn't have been worth playing at all. The paper always looked too clean. That was the first problem. A fresh sheet of lined stationery pulled from the bottom of your rucksack stood out against everything around you. The mud, the mildew, the sweat-soaked cloth, the damp bandages that smelled of iodine. None of it matched the neat rectangle in your lap. It felt almost wrong to put pen to it, like you were dragging dirt across something that belonged to another world. But you did it anyway, because everyone else did, and because you knew that somewhere far away, someone was waiting to hear from you. Your hands didn't want to cooperate. They trembled, sometimes from exhaustion, sometimes from nerves, sometimes just because you'd spent too long pressing down on wounds until your fingers locked. Holding a pen after that felt clumsy, like trying to stitch words together with hands made for tourniquets, not sentences. The ink smeared when the sweat rolled off your wrist, and sometimes the paper itself grew soft and wrinkled from the humidity. You wrote anyway, because you had to. The words came slow. You never started with the truth. You didn't tell them about the screams that woke you in the night, or the man you'd lost that morning whose face was still in your head. You didn't tell them about the rain that soaked through everything you owned, or the infections you couldn't treat, or the friend you watched bleed out before a helicopter could arrive. Those things had no place in the neat square of paper. Instead, you started with lies that felt like kindness. You told them you were fine, that things weren't so bad, that you were eating, that you were keeping busy. Sometimes you added jokes, ones that didn't even sound funny as you wrote them. A story about the food, about the way your boots smelled, about the jungle critters that got into rations. You made it light because you imagined them reading it at the kitchen table, coffee steaming, sunlight pouring through the window. You didn't want to smear blood across that picture. You wanted them to think you were safe, that the days were manageable, that you were still the same person who'd left. But the truth slipped in whether you wanted it to or not. Your handwriting gave you away, shaky and uneven. The words grew shorter, clipped, because your brain couldn't find the energy to stretch them out. Sometimes you caught yourself staring at the page for 10 minutes without writing a single line, your mind wandering back to the smell of gunpowder or the sight of blood spilling faster than your hands could stop. You'd blink, wipe your eyes, and scrawl something meaningless just to fill the space, praying it didn't look as hollow as it felt. There were things you wanted to say that never made it down. You wanted to tell them how afraid you were, how every step felt borrowed, how you didn't know if you'd live to send another letter. You wanted to tell them about the men around you, how close you'd grown, how much it hurt to lose them. You wanted to write the names of the ones who didn't make it, so someone back home would remember. But you didn't. The pencil hovered, the pen scratched halfway, and then you pulled back. You folded the paper instead, tucking it into the envelope, sealing it with sweat and dirt, and letting the silence do the work. Mail call was its own ritual. You watched men's faces light up when their names were called, watched them tear open envelopes with hands that had carried rifles all day. You read their letters over their shoulders sometimes, not the words, but the look on their faces as they devoured every line. Then you pulled out your own, the ones you'd written with trembling fingers, and wondered how it would feel to be on the other end. Would they notice the stains on the paper? Would they smell the mildew? Would they recognize the shaky hand as yours? Or would they only see the words and let themselves believe them? There was guilt in those letters. Guilt for lying, guilt for hiding what was real. But you convinced yourself it was mercy. They didn't need to carry what you carried. The weight of blood, the sound of screams, the endless fight with mud and disease, that was yours, not theirs. So you smoothed the paper flat, signed your name at the bottom, and added words you barely believed anymore. I'm okay, don't worry. And sometimes you weren't even writing for them. Sometimes you were writing for yourself, scratching down words just to prove your hand could still form letters, that you could still make sense of sentences, that part of your brain hadn't been swallowed entirely by the jungle. It was proof that you were still tethered to the world outside, even if it felt impossibly far away. When the letters left your hands, carried off in a pouch or packed onto a helicopter, you always felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the words were gone, carried away, no longer trapped in your chest. Heavier because now they belonged to someone else. Someone who would read them and build a picture of you that wasn't true, but was all you could give. You folded your hands then, smudged with ink and dirt, and waited for the next chance to write again, hoping that by the time they held the paper, you'd still be alive for the words to matter. Sleep in the jungle wasn't rest. It was surrender, and it never felt safe. You lay down not because you wanted to, but because your body forced you to. Muscles burned from hauling gear all day. Your shoulders ached from carrying weight you couldn't drop. Your head throbbed from the constant noise and the heat pressing against your skull. You closed your eyes because you had no choice, not because you believed anything good would come from it. The ground was always wet. Even when it hadn't rained, the earth clung to your skin with a dampness that never let go. You spread out a poncho, curled into yourself, and still felt the cold mud soaking into your clothes, climbing up your back like a parasite. The smell of mildew clung to everything, your pack, your boots, your own body, until you stopped noticing it, except in moments like this when it surrounded you like a blanket. Fear was everywhere, stitched into every breath. You didn't have to be in a firefight to feel it. It lingered even in the quiet, maybe especially in the quiet. Every rustle in the brush sounded like movement. Every snap of a twig could have been a rifle stock brushing against bark. The jungle never slept, and that meant you never really did either. You lay there with your ears straining, your eyes fluttering open every few minutes. Your hand never far from your weapon, even if you weren't supposed to use it. For a medic, the fear ran deeper. You weren't just worried about yourself. You were worried about the call that might come at any second. A man coughing, a man groaning, a man whispering your name because he couldn't stop the bleeding on his own. Sleep was never guaranteed, never uninterrupted. You could be pulled out of half dreams in an instant, crawling through mud with your aid bag, while your brain still fumbled between nightmare and reality. The body fought back in strange ways. Sometimes exhaustion hit so hard, you dropped into unconsciousness the moment you closed your eyes, even with the insects buzzing, even with artillery rumbling in the distance. You'd wake minutes later, disoriented, unsure if you'd slept at all, heart racing because the silence felt too unnatural. Other times you lay awake for hours, staring at the dark canopy above, every shadow shifting into a figure, every distant call morphing into a cry for help. Nightmares didn't wait for sleep. They bled into the edges of your waking moments. You'd drift, only half gone, and suddenly see faces of the wounded staring down at you, mouths open, blood on their lips. You'd jolt awake, chest tight, eyes darting to the men beside you who slept without stirring. You envied them and hated them at the same time, their ability to sink into oblivion while you lay prisoner to your own head. The jungle itself made sleep impossible. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds, whining at your ears, piercing your skin through every gap in fabric. Rats scurried close, drawn to rations or the warmth of bodies. Sometimes you felt them brush against your boots, and you flinched but didn't move, too tired to chase them away. The air clung to you, thick and hot, and it even stripped down to your undershirt. Sweat pooled on your skin. Rolling over didn't help. Curling tighter didn't help. Nothing did. And always above it all was the possibility of attack. Mortars could fall without warning. A firefight could erupt in seconds. You told yourself you'd be ready, that you'd leap up, grab your gear, and move with the others. But deep down, you knew that if it came while you were half asleep, you'd stumble in confusion, your body slow to catch up to your brain. That knowledge kept you hovering on the edge of sleep, afraid to sink too deep. Men developed rituals. Some cleaned their weapons before lying down, not because it needed doing, but because it gave their hands something to do while their minds spun. Some smoked, letting the glow of the cigarette burn down to nothing, watching it fade as if it might take their fear with it. Some whispered prayers, words mumbled into the darkness, not caring if anyone heard. Others told jokes, bad ones, just to hear laughter before the silence swallowed them again. You joined in sometimes, because pretending normal made the fear easier to carry. But when the laughter died, the silence always returned, heavier than before. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and cruel. You dreamed of home, of warmth, of clean sheets, and then woke with mud under your fingernails and the stink of sweat in your nose. You dreamed of men you couldn't save, and woke with your fists clenched, nails digging into your palms. You dreamed of helicopters, of rescue, of escape, and woke to the same canopy overhead, the same drip of water onto your face. Every dream was a reminder that you were still trapped here, still surrounded by fear you couldn't escape. You learned to accept that sleep would never be rest, only a pause. A pause where your body shut down just enough to keep moving the next day, but never long enough to give you peace. Fear seeped into you like the damp, permanent and inescapable part of every breath, every restless turn in the mud. And when dawn finally came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like survival, just long enough to do it all over again. There were wounds you couldn't do anything about. You carried your aid bag like it was a lifeline, full of gauze, morphine, scissors, tourniquets, tape. You told yourself it mattered, that it could make the difference. And sometimes it did. Sometimes a bandage and a quick hand saved a man long enough for a helicopter to carry him away. But too often, you unzipped that bag, pulled out what you had, and realised in an instant that nothing inside could help. It was the chest wounds that haunted you most, the sucking sound of air slipping through a hole, the froth of blood bubbling with every laboured breath. You'd press your hands against it, try to seal it, try to hold the life in, but you knew. The pressure inside built too fast, the lungs collapsed, the man gasped like a fish on the bank, eyes wide and wild. You whispered to him, told him to hold on, but all you could really give him was a slower death, not a rescue. There were head wounds too, shrapnel tearing through skulls, bullets glancing but not missing enough. You knelt beside them, watched their eyes roll, saw their limbs jerk uncontrollably. You cleaned what you could, wrapped it in gauze, but deep down you knew you weren't patching a cut. You were staring at a brain that had already taken more damage than anyone could survive. You held their hands anyway, because that was the only thing left you could do. Amputations were another kind of nightmare. Mines and traps tore legs off clean, sometimes both at once. You cinched the tourniquet as high and tight as you could, your hands sticky with blood, your ears filled with their screams. You told yourself it was enough, that if the helicopter came fast enough, maybe they'd live. But even if they did, you knew they'd never walk again. You tried not to think about that as you worked. You focused on the bleeding, on the mechanics of saving a body, not on the future that body no longer had. Disease was its own reminder of your limits. Malaria, dysentery, hepatitis. You carried pills, powders, salts, but they were stopgaps, not cures. Men wasted away in front of you, skin yellowing, eyes hollowing, bodies shrinking into shadows. You could keep them comfortable, maybe stretch their suffering longer, but you couldn't pull them back. You learned to measure your words carefully, saying, "You'll be fine," when what you meant was, "I hope you last the night." Infections mocked your effort. You cleaned wounds, drained pus, pressed iodine into open sores. You wrapped them in gauze, told them to rest, to keep it dry, knowing full well nothing stayed dry in the jungle. Days later you peeled back the bandage and found the rot spreading anyway. The smell hit before you even saw it. Flesh softening, blackening, devouring itself. You wanted to scream at the sky, at the mud, at the endless dampness that turned every cut into a death sentence. But instead, you forced your hand steady, reached for more gauze, tried again. There were the men you couldn't reach at all. Calls for medic echoing through the trees, gunfire rattling the canopy, but you couldn't move. Too much fire, no clear path. You crouched low, fists clenched, hearing their voices break and fade, knowing they were bleeding out what you hid behind a tree. Useless. You carried that sound forever. Louder than helicopters, louder than mortars. That one word screamed until it dissolved into silence. And then there were the wounds you couldn't see. The men who kept moving, kept fighting, but whose eyes were glassy and distant. They sat too quiet during downtime, stared too long at the ground, jumped at every noise. You knew they were breaking, but your kit had nothing for that. No bandage for fear, no morphine for nightmares. You gave them cigarettes, water, maybe a pat on the shoulder, but you knew it wasn't enough. You knew they were unravelling in ways you couldn't fix. The hardest moments came when you did everything right and it still wasn't enough. You wrapped, injected, carried, shouted, prayed, and the man still died under your hands. You looked at your bloody fingers, at the empty wrappers from your kit, at the pale body cooling in the mud, and realised you had lost. It didn't matter how hard you tried. Some things weren't yours to save. You told yourself it wasn't your fault, that you weren't a surgeon, that you weren't God. But the guilt stayed anyway. It sat heavy on your chest as you lay down at night, heavier than the damp, heavier than the heat. You replayed it over and over, the breath rattling out, the grip loosening on your hand, the eyes going still, and wondered what else you could have done. The truth was, there was nothing, but knowing that didn't make it hurt less. There were too many things you couldn't fix, and every one of them stayed with you, carried like scars no one else could see, long after the mud washed away and the war moved on. Every step you took out there felt heavier than it should have. Not just because of the gear, not just because of the wet boots sucking against the mud, but because of the weight you carried inside your head. Everyone around you was armed, rifles slung, grenades strapped, weapons ready to answer fire with fire. You were armed too, technically, but that wasn't what people looked at when they saw you. They saw the bag slung across your shoulder, the one packed not with bullets, but with gauze, bandages, morphine, tape, and shears. The bag that made you more than just another body in the line. It marked you as the one who had to hold the balance between living and dying, and that weight never left you. You didn't get to hesitate, you didn't get to flinch. When someone went down, you moved, whether your hands were steady or not, whether your stomach was in knots or not. It didn't matter if rounds cracked past your ears, or if explosions rattled the ground under your knees. You didn't think about cover first. You thought about pressure points, airways, blood flow. You ran toward the sounds of agony while everyone else tried to suppress it with fire. And every time, you knew it was your hands that might decide whether the man screaming in the dirt would make it another hour. That kind of responsibility changes the way you think. You measured moments differently. A few seconds of hesitation could mean a man bled out before you got there. A single mistake could mean the difference between a wound that healed and a wound that killed. You didn't think about the whole war anymore. You thought about one body at a time, one breath at a time. You thought about how fast you could get a bandage on, how tightly you could cinch a tourniquet, how quickly you could drag someone to cover. Everything else fell away because the weight on your shoulders forced your focus into razor-thin lines. But the weight didn't go away after the fighting stopped. It pressed on you in the quiet just as much. Men trusted you, leaned on you in ways that went beyond the battlefield. They asked you to check rashes, to look at infections, to reassure them that their cough wasn't the start of malaria. They looked at you like you held answers you didn't always have. You nodded anyway, gave them advice, parcelled out the last of your iodine, handed over pills you weren't sure would help. You carried their trust like another piece of gear, strapped tight to your back, impossible to set down. And then there were the times when you couldn't save them. The times when the blood poured too fast, or the wound was too deep, or the helicopter never came. You felt the life drain out under your palms, felt their grip weaken, saw the light fade from their eyes, and you were the one left behind, still breathing. You told yourself you had done everything you could, but the weight didn't let go. It sat heavier, pressing into you long after the body was carried away. You replayed it in your head again and again, wondering if there was some trick, some move, some choice you could have made that would have kept them alive. That second guessing never ended. It built up over time, one face on top of another, until you carried them all. The weight wasn't just about life and death in the moment. It was about what came after. You thought about the families back home, the mothers who would open letters with official stamps, the fathers who would stare at the wall in silence, the children who might never even remember their father's face. You carried that knowledge in your chest, that every time you failed, it rippled outward into lives you'd never see. Even when you succeeded, you thought about the scars the man would carry, the limbs he'd lost, the pain that wouldn't end when the war did. You carried that too. And sometimes men put their faith in you in ways that cut deeper than wounds. They looked you in the eye and begged you not to let them die, begged you to keep them awake. It begged you to tell their family something if they didn't make it. You heard their voices in your head long after the noise of gunfire faded. You heard their words in the middle of the night when you were trying to close your eyes. It wasn't just about their blood on your hands. It was about their words echoing inside you, binding you to promises you could never keep. The bag never got lighter. Every time you opened it and pulled something out, the weight inside you grew heavier, even if the straps on your shoulder eased for a moment. The balance between life and death wasn't fair. It wasn't even. Sometimes you won, sometimes you lost, but the weight stayed either way. You carried it in silence, because there was no one to hand it to, no one who could shoulder it for you. It belonged to you, and it pressed down harder with every step, every scream, every silence that followed. It wasn't just a role, it was a sentence. You could patch holes, you could hold blood in with your hands, you could whisper promises to men who were slipping away, but you could never set the weight down. It lived on your shoulders, in your chest, behind your eyes. And no matter how far you walked, how many times you pressed gauze into wounds, or how many times you looked at the sky and begged for a helicopter, the weight only grew heavier. The flight out didn't feel like victory. It felt like confusion. One moment you were sweating in the jungle, mud caked into every crease of your skin, listening for the crack of rifles, waiting for the call that would drag you to another bleeding body. The next you were strapped into a seat, boots still damp, watching clouds drift past the window of a plane that hummed too calmly for your nerves. You didn't clap or cheer when the wheels left the ground. You just sat there, gripping your knees, wondering if it was really over, or if you'd wake up back in the jungle, drenched in sweat, with your aid bag at your side. Stepping off onto American soil was supposed to feel like relief, but it didn't. The air smelled different, clean in a way that felt unnatural. The ground was dry, paved, steady under your boots, and instead of calming you, it made you dizzy. The silence was louder than any firefight. Cars rolled by, people talked casually on sidewalks, music drifted out of shops. None of it made sense. You felt like a ghost moving through it, seeing a world that had gone on living without you, one you weren't sure you belonged to anymore. People asked questions you couldn't answer. They asked what it was like. They asked if it had been bad. They asked if you'd saved anyone. You nodded, smiled, shrugged, anything to make the conversation end. Because the truth wasn't something you could pack into words. How could you tell them about the weight of someone dying under your hands? How could you explain the smell of blood soaked into your clothes for days? Or the sound of someone screaming your name for help you couldn't give? How could you explain that, even in the quiet of your own bed, you still heard the thrum of helicopters in the distance, still felt the mud pulling at your legs? Nights didn't get easier. The mattress was soft, too soft, and instead of comfort, it felt like sinking. Every creak of the house made your heart jolt. Every car backfiring outside sent your body rigid. Dreams weren't dreams anymore. They were reruns. The same scenes over and over. A man clutching his chest, a stretcher slipping in the mud, a helicopter rising while you stood below. You woke with your fists clenched, breath shallow, sweat soaking through sheets. And sometimes you reached for your aid bag before you realised there was nothing to grab. The weight you carried in the jungle didn't vanish when you stepped off the plane. It stayed inside you, stitched into the fabric of your mind. Every face you couldn't save walked with you. Every scream followed you into grocery stores, into quiet Sunday mornings, into the space between you and the people who wanted you to be whole again. You smiled for them, but it never reached your eyes. They wanted the person who had left. What came back was someone different, someone who still lived half in the jungle, even when his body was thousands of miles away. You tried writing again. Not the shaky letters on damp paper, but clean ones on clean desks with clean pens. But the words still stumbled. They came out clipped, guarded, empty. You couldn't write about what mattered. Not then, not ever. The gulf between what you'd seen and what they could understand was too wide. So you stuck to pleasantries, weather, small updates. The silence inside you only grew. Some days you thought you were fine. You walked through towns, laughed at jokes, ate meals that weren't rations. For a while you almost believed it. Then a smell would catch you. Smoke, fuel, sweat. And you were back there in an instant, heart racing, palms slick, stomach twisting. The world tilted, and you had to steady yourself against a wall, against a table, against anything solid to remind yourself that you weren't there anymore. But your body never believed it. Coming home wasn't really coming home. It was pretending. Pretending that the nights weren't long. Pretending that you didn't still see faces. Pretending that your shoulders weren't still carrying the weight of life and death, even though your aid bag was long gone. The war never let you go. It stayed in your blood, in your bones, in your dreams. You carried it quietly because no one wanted to hear it, not really. They wanted clean stories, easy answers, neat endings. The war had given you none of those. So you kept it inside. You went about your days, nodded when people thanked you, swallowed your words when people criticised you, and tried to keep moving forward. But the truth never changed. You'd left the jungle, but the jungle had never left you. You walked sidewalks, sat in kitchens, lay in beds, but part of you was still kneeling in the mud, hands slick with blood, whispering to someone to hold on, praying for the sound of a helicopter that might or might not come. That was the reality of coming home. You made it back in body, but not in whole. You carried the war everywhere, in every step, in every quiet moment, in every dream. You had left Vietnam, but Vietnam never left you. So that's what it was like. Not the newsreel version, not the movie version, but the long, drawn-out reality of what it meant to be a combat medic in Vietnam. The sweat, the mud, the screams, the endless gamble of helicopters, the letters written with shaking hands, the fear that never let you sleep, and the weight you carried long after you stepped off the plane home. It wasn't about heroics, not really. It was about holding pressure on wounds while your ears rang from gunfire. It was about trying to keep one man breathing while another one called your name from the dark. It was about carrying guilt like a second skin, about surviving while others didn't, about coming back to a world that looked the same but no longer felt like it fit. And even now, decades later, the echoes don't go away. They stay in the corners of the mind, in the silence of the night, in the way the body tenses at sudden noises. The war doesn't end just because the shooting stops. For medics, it never really ended at all. So as you drift now, lying in your own quiet, in your own bed, with your own breath steady in your chest, think about the men who didn't have that luxury. The ones who carried scissors and bandages into a war zone and tried to hold life together with their hands. The ones who came home but never really left. And with that, let the weight slide off your shoulders. Let the hum of their story fade into the background. Close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and sink into the silence. Because for now you're safe.